Hey guys, how you doing today? This is Jamie Caparoso, your big bad keto daddy, saying holla if you hear me. So I've been seeing a lot of questions being posted on Keto Gains page and otherwise, and I thought I'd shoot a little fundamentals of squatting to help you out. So my background is 25 years of competitive drug-free powerlifting. I've ranked in different federations and all over the world, competed at a world level, had my most success in a state of keto adaptation, nutritional ketosis. So I just thought I'd share with you guys some of the basics and help you guys get started. Now, what I say isn't gospel, it's just what I've picked up over the last 25 years. There's always going to be different reasons to do different things. So again, I thought I'd shoot this little video, get you guys started for who want to get going and ask some of the common questions in squatting. Whenever I illustrate squatting, I always break my body down into two hemispheres, upper body and lower body. From the upper body, it's pretty common to pull your shoulder blades together and tuck them in your back pocket. So it looks something like this. Pull your shoulder blades together, tuck them in your back pocket. That gives you a nice, solid, stable spine and helps you squeeze into the bar a little easier. From the belly button down, it's a little more complicated. You always want to squat into loading your posterior chain. That's even if you are doing a bodybuilding type of squat, an Olympic type of squat, or a powerlifting type of squat, which again is my background. So from the belly button down, you always want to start by engaging your posterior chain, which usually means is that you can start by pushing back into your hamstrings and glutes. So a lot of times people think that you just descend into the squat. In reality, what you want to do is load that posterior chain, push back, drive your knees away from each other. Another common thing that you'll hear is pull the floor apart. That is something that's for interpretation, but what they actually really mean to do is tear the floor apart. And that comes from the analogy of everyone's taken a piece of paper, folded it in half a couple times, put it on the desk, take your hands and rip that piece of paper apart along the crease. That's more or less what you're trying to do with your feet. So if you're standing in your squat stance, they want you to try and tear the floor apart. What that actually does, it's more like screwing your foot into the ground. So as you engage that posterior chain, you're also trying to screw your foot into the ground, descending through that motion. What that does is it opens up your hips and creates torque in your hips and in your knees, all right? So whether you're a wide stance squatter or a narrow stance squatter, those things pretty much hold true. Where I come from in the competitive powerlifting world, it's usually a nice wide stance, and for depth, it's hip crease below top of knee, okay? And out of the, I guess, current 52 different federations, I think almost all of them agree on the fact that hip crease is below top of knee. And what that would look like from the side is, if you're judging from the side, is here's your hip crease right here. Here's the top of your knee. You want to engage, push back to your hip crease is below the top of your knee. Which brings me to another point. A lot of times you guys post videos on how check my form, check my depth. And a lot of times you have a real crappy camera angle. So if you're videoing that, have whoever's holding the camera down at about knee level, because the idea is that, again, that hip crease is below top of knee. Now that's the minimum requirement in most powerlifting federations. If you're doing Olympic lifts or bodybuilding lifts, you're probably going to want to get ass to grass anyway, which just means as deep as you can get. In Olympic lifts, you're trying to get as low as you can to get underneath the bar, and in bodybuilding, you're trying to get that full range of motion. And then varying degrees of foot placement. So if you don't have that, or maybe you don't have any friends, you might want to get one of these little tripods and make sure that it's right at about knee height. That way when you're looking across at it, someone can check your depth, or you can play it back and check your own depth. All right? So what have we covered so far? We covered the setup, pull your shoulder blades together, tuck them in your back pocket, engage your posterior chain, rip the floor apart. Oh yeah, another thing is if you're recording that and you're asking people to judge your depth, don't wear black. Black on black with a black background quite often gets lost in washed out in the film. Wear something light and bright so people can check your depth if that's actually what you're asking for. So let's go over a quick basic setup, getting underneath the bar, which is pretty common too. A lot of people don't know how to get out of the rack. You're going to want to center yourself on the bar. Sometimes it's nice to have a mirror to do that. What you also can do is make sure your hands are even on the bar and pull back. Assuming your arms are the same length, that will center you out and you can come underneath the bar. Now you want to make sure that whether you're doing a high bar squat or a low bar squat, you want to make sure your hips get jammed underneath the bar and you stand straight up. From this point, you want to slide your feet back into position. Again, whether it's narrow or wide, it really doesn't matter. But what you're trying to avoid is taking actual steps where the bar would be going like this. Now with a light load, not a big deal, but if you were going for a max effort lift, that may be an issue, catching you off balance. So next thing you want to do is you're going to pull those shoulder blades together, tuck them in your back pocket, tuck your elbows underneath the bar, push your hamstrings and butt back, create torque and spread the floor apart and descend until you get that hip crease below the top of your knee. From here, it's drive your hips forward. Back into the rack is just walk right to the rack till it hits it, slide down. Now again, I'm simplifying it and trying to make a fundamental squat video here, so I'm trying to keep it very generic. Quite often you also hear about butt wink, and which is very common. And a lot of people think that's based on hip mobility, and it could be. A lot of us sit for a living, sit while driving, sit at a desk, and that causes a lot of immobility in your hips. Another thing that's very common is ankle mobility. You want to make sure that your ankles have flexibility, so when you get to the bottom of that hole, this doesn't happen. Your heels come up off the ground. Now that's a natural reaction to trying to keep your spine straight, because if you get to the bottom of the hole, and you don't have that ankle mobility, your back will tend to do this, which is a position of no power. As soon as you start that butt wink position, you start losing all your power. And you can illustrate that by, if you get down here and round over and pretended you had a max load on your back, you would not be able to get out of the hole. What you'd like to do is get that back nice and straight and drive up out of the hole. Again, I'm using fundamentals and rules of thumb, and there's different ways to do different things. But as soon as your back starts rounding over, you start losing a lot of that power, which brings me to shoes. So people ask quite often, what's better to lift in? Should I lift in my Ollie shoes or should I lift in my Chucks? Well, that depends on your goals again. These really help for super deep squats, especially in Olympic lifts. You're doing cleans and snatches where you're trying to get low and underneath the bar. What that does is it helps with what I just showed you, with keeping your back straight, and maybe you don't have that ankle mobility, okay? And that's usually in a narrower stance. Chuck Taylors are nice because they're set up for a nice wide low heel, and they have a squared off edge. So if you're doing a wide powerlifting stance and you want to sit back into that posterior chain and then you're trying to tear the floor apart and then your foot won't roll over because it has a squared heel, also being low to the ground lets you change your center of gravity with a low bar squat, low on your back, and get into that posterior chain more. You'll see those really popular in Westside Barbell videos, Elite Fitness, Jim Wendler videos, stuff like that. Another question I get is knee sleeves. These are great. I like the classic Ray-Bans. They keep a lot of warmth in your joints. If you're training in a cold climate or a cold basement, it's really nice to have these. It doesn't support the joint as much as it helps keep it warm, which is always nice. I get asked about belts. Powerlifting belt, this old beast here. Is it necessary? Probably not. You could probably develop a better core if you didn't use it. I've been doing competitive powerlifting for 25 years. I'm so used to pushing into the belt and creating that torque and helping it to get out of the hole that anything 80% or more I use. So another real quick thing is your rack and your bar. This is a Westside barbell from Rogue. It has 1-inch hole spacing through this area here, which is really nice for dialing in your safety rails. And if you're training by yourself, you're an idiot if you don't use them. You want to dial those things in to get to the point where if you have to fail, you can just let go of the bar right here and it's resting on the rails. Really, really advantageous, especially if you're benching in the rack. If you're at your point of failure and you got a hard arch, you can just drop right on those racks and be safe. 2-inch hole spacing the rest of the way helps it easy to dial your bar in and get up underneath the bar. Low lip on your J hooks is really important too, so you don't have to do a whole squat to get it out of your power rack. Actually, cameraman, come here, I want to show the bar real quick. So you also notice this is a Texas power bar and there's got center knurling. That's pretty important, keeps it from sliding off your back. If you happen to have one of those cheapo chrome bars that you get from a discount center, that's fine too, but I would suggest putting some just generic friction tape around the center. That'll keep it from sliding off your t-shirt. Let me see if I covered everything I wanted to cover in fundamentals. We actually have a Monolift here for those of you who don't know what that is. I'm going to shoot a little video on wide stance squatting and powerlifting squatting over there in a second, but I think we're good here. So with that being said, let's move on over to the Monolift.